Queensland storyteller, I'm Kim Dodsworth. Mary Hind is a Melbourne writer who has kindly entrusted us with two of her excellent short stories. Today it's my pleasure to read the first of them, Deadline for Murder, a nail-biter of the first degree. Let's sit back now and enjoy Deadline for Murder. This time tomorrow night, Brooke Mallory would be dead. But how? That was the question to which Jake had no clear answer right now. He drained his second beer of the evening and signalled the barman to keep the refills coming. He always got a buzz out of the planning stage, but the actual killing, the method of the victim's death, was another matter. In truth, the whole business of murder was beginning to pall. Take his last victim, the drug baron, Gianfranco Baldini, head blown off with a semi-automatic, brains splattered all over the fine art collection in his Toorak mansion. Effective, but crude. Jake shuddered, remembering the sleepless nights spent planning that one. Lately he'd considered giving it all up for a quiet life in front of the TV. Ridiculous idea, of course. What else would keep him in enough beer to give him the balls to fight his ex, Helen, over custody of the dog? Then there was that cracked vase her mother had given them. Well, how could he have known it was some valuable family heirloom? Where he came from, you were lucky to get something from the $2 shop from your nana at Christmas. Helen had never tried to understand him. As for Brooke Mallory, there was a woman who understood her man only too well. The trouble was, her man was the powerful Dan Mallory, owner of every brothel in the Southern Hemisphere, a front for sex slavery, heroin trafficking, and the worldwide porn industry, to name but a few of his unsavoury activities. Jake recalled the moment when Dan realised his marriage had become a toxic boil that required immediate lancing. "Wouldn't you think," Dan had said, punctuating every second word with a jab of an index finger at the wedding portrait on his desk, "that the expensively educated daughter of a career criminal would have learned at her mother's knee to keep her mouth shut and her fingers out of her husband's suit pockets?" Dan slumped back in his Lexington button-back executive leather chair, panting as if he'd run a marathon. He wasn't used to uttering sentences of more than 3 words. Dan's logic was sound, of course, but what this stone-hearted bully would never see was that it was his own fault. If he hadn't been so careless about leaving a business card in his pocket with Zsa Zsa's name and mobile number in pencil in his own fair hand, he wouldn't need the services of the best hitman in the country to rub out an enraged missus. "Don't tell me your father didn't sample the goodies from his local strip club empire occasionally," he ranted on. "It's business. And would you believe she had me followed? Me! I'd like to find the filthy little toe rag who dared take on that job. She even had the nerve to bleat out a list of my business meetings. Then she got hysterical, threatened to go to the police unless I promised absolute fidelity. As if. Claimed she didn't give a damn about the consequences for herself. Ha! No more first-class round-the-world cruises. No more $5,000 shoes. I'd like to see that." With every breath, Dan's voice had risen an octave, and his normally florid and baggy cheeks inflated until they resembled 2 huge purple balloons. Speaking in paragraphs was clearly getting to him. Jake had wanted to shut him up right there and then in case he had a heart attack. But he sensed Dan had more spleen to vent than a herd of mastodons, so he let him go on. "So I tried reasoning, offered her the diamond ring I'd intended for Zsa Zsa, or was it Candice? Argyle, 1 carat. You know what the bitch did then? She grabbed it, switched on the waste disposal, and chucked it in with a look as if I'd given her something off the bottom of my shoe." Jake could identify with that look. He remembered being a recipient of it when Helen was giving him yet another of her ice-cold shoulder treatments over one of his many inadequacies. Probably the time he spent drinking in pubs and bars while planning on ex-killing. Later, when he hoped a thaw might be setting in, he presented her with tickets to the World Championship drag car races. Some bloke he vaguely knew at the pub had been handing them out for free. Without even acknowledging his first tentative step towards working on their relationship, as she insisted on calling it, she tore them into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet without a word of thanks. Helen, however, was past tense, and it wouldn't be too long before the same could be said of Brooke Mallory. But this trip down memory lane wasn't helping Jake come up with the method of her demise. He took 3 gulps of beer as he went over and over in his mind everything Dan had said, such as not trusting her anymore, so he'd begun watching her like a hawk. In fact, Dan had been paying a private eye to follow Brooke's every movement. He was even having her emails and mobile phone calls intercepted. He'd also started to believe, with good reason, that she was giving the gardener the eye, and no way was he going to allow her the opportunity to reveal anything more newsworthy than her brand of soap. As Dan so beautifully expressed it, "I'm not letting some randy greenfinger make hay with my wife, only to find my business dealings spread all over the tabloids like horse shit around the roses." All Dan wanted, he'd said over and over, was a quick, clean job. How difficult was that for a professional, Jake asked himself. Suddenly, a picture of Brooke sprawled across the Persian rug like Baldini, unrecognisable except for her impeccably tailored Dolce Vita suit and chunky cut red hair, leapt uninvited into his head. Okay, it was quick, but he had to find a solution that let him sleep. Drowning in the spa. Nice and clean, literally, smelling of Chanel No. 5. Of course, she'd have to be drugged first with some completely undetectable and untraceable substance. That would take extra time and cost a lot more money. Jake was running out of time, while Dan had already balked at the cost until, that is, he'd been made to see that 200 grand was cheaper than paying off the standover merchants he could be taking afternoon tea with in jail if the plan went pear-shaped. Of course, as Dan was already suspicious of the gardener, Jake could always put him in the frame. All he'd have to do would be to... No, he'd used those MOs before. The last thing he wanted to do was establish a pattern. Besides, as the husband was always the prime suspect, it would be better to bump her off away from home. Make it look random. Wrong place, wrong time, and all that. But how could a strange man get that close to her without raising suspicion? Jake squeezed his eyes shut, trying to picture the details of Brooke's movements. There were beauty salon appointments, lunches with girlfriends, and walking that useless fur ball, Dan's sneering description of her pet dog Brittany. "There's a bonus in it if the mutt goes too," Dan had added with a hideous gobbling sound that passed for a laugh. Of course! The dog! Why hadn't he thought of it before? Don't perfect strangers always bond with each other when they're out walking their pooches? The stranger could be an impeccably dressed man, Armani or Zegna. He stops to ask Brooke if she's seen his dog, a pedigree schnitzer-doodle or something. When Brooke shakes her head sympathetically, says she'll keep an eye out, then goes to walk off, he looks distressed and explains the dog belongs to his sick wife. She's having her last chemotherapy session, and he doesn't know what it'll do to her if he can't bring precious little Ludwig home. Brooke is touched and agrees to help. Together, they search the reserve where his dying wife's beloved pet was last seen, a neglected corner between the dense melaleucas and a pile of dumped mattresses. In his hand, the man carries one of those extendable dog leads, just right for strangulation. Jake rubbed his hands together. At last he was getting somewhere. He retrieved an old envelope from his pocket and scribbled some notes on the back. Glancing around, he noticed the place had emptied and the barman wanted to close up. He slid off the stool and steadied himself against the bar. Time to get back to the flat and make a large pot of coffee. Black, triple strength. He was going to need every bit of help with staying awake tonight. As soon as the deadline arrived at exactly 9 tomorrow morning, his publisher would be pestering him for the next, or would it be the last, Jake Riley murder mystery. And that was Deadline for Murder by Mary Hind of Melbourne. Thank you, Mary, for a great contribution. We hope you'll favour us with more of your work again this year. I'm Kim Dodsworth, Queensland storyteller.